Welcome back to another episode of the Startup Therapy Podcast. This is Ryan Rutan, joined as ever by my friend and the founder and CEO of Startups.com, Wil Schroeder. Wil, we talk to lots of founders, which is probably the understatement of the day, if not the week, maybe the month. We talk to lots and lots and lots and lots of founders, and I know one of the areas that we spend a lot of time talking to founders, early stage, and sometimes even second and third timers, is this concept of like, I'm working on the idea, I keep looking for the idea, I'm trying to find the perfect idea, I just keep going back and back. I filled out 15 business model canvases and crumpled them all up and thrown them into the fireplace. Like, what is it that gets us stuck here? And what should we actually be doing? What should we be actually thinking about in this moment, as opposed to like the next big idea? Where do we go from there? Like when we find ourselves stuck at that point, what's the actual next step?
I think what's screwing with us is, let's say we want to get from Connecticut to California.
Sounds good.
What we're trying to think of is, okay, what's the first step? What's the perfect path to getting there? This perfect idea that I've thought of. And the reality is, it kind of doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right? Like whatever idea we have right now is going to change anyway. But where we throw ourselves off is the idea, which we're spending so much time trying to perfect, is just a mechanism. It's a mechanism to get us somewhere.
Yes.
Right? To create a life that we want. It's a mechanism to let us not have to do things we don't want to do. It's a mechanism to make me feel the way we want to feel. It does all these things, but we never talk about that stuff.
That's right. Right. People inherently think that the idea is just about the idea and what the business ends up being, when what we're really trying to do, to your point, is change our own circumstances in some way. Yes, impact the world. Yes, change things. Yes, do good. But at the end of the day, it really is about the transformation of the founder as much as it is about the idea. And we leave all of that by the wayside as we whiteboard ourselves to death over exactly how we're going to get from Connecticut to California.
All right, so before we get into this next topic, I just want to let you know, what we talk about here is like 1% of the conversation. Really, this conversation is going on all day long online at groups.startups.com, where Ryan and I pretty much talk endlessly with founders about every one of these topics. So if by the end of this discussion, you like the topic and you want to dig into it a little bit more with Ryan and I, just head to groups.startups.com and we'll pick it up from there. I think, in sake of this analogy, we are so hung up on the business model, right?
Yeah.
We want to be this for that, right? And we want this beautiful business model that's going to, it's just this genius idea. And that's cool. Like, there's nothing wrong with having that. But when I talk to founders who are in this stage, whether they're first-time founders or whether they've done this a bunch of times, always ask them the same questions. Assuming whatever idea you have or don't have works.
Yes.
What will life be like for you? Well, I'll be successful. Okay, no, that's still just a mechanism, not the right answer.
Also a very poorly defined one, because what does that mean?
Correct, right? That's like saying, I'll be successful. I just want to go west. I don't even know where it's taking me, right? I'm on the east, I want to go west, and that's all the thought I've put into this, right? So what I want to drill down with today, and what I talk to founders about, and Ryan, you and I go through the same catharsis with folks, is that I want to be able to say, let's take the idea, the business model, whatever, off the table for a second.
Yep.
Let's talk instead about what we want this business to achieve. And then, guess what? Once you start to work backward from what you're actually trying to achieve in life, you find a whole bunch of stuff that you thought might be a cool business idea that once you know where you're trying to get, it doesn't sink at all.
Yes.
On the other hand, there's a much higher probability that you're going to wind up in a spot where what your business idea is, and we'll give you some examples like our own, actually is in sync with what you'd love to do.
Yes.
Had you given it just a little bit of thought. And so today we'll walk through exactly what that series of questions, that battery of questions look like. What are those themes that you have to think through? And really, what are some of the costs of not having thought through this and just kind of going guns in because you just want to start a startup? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I would also say, though, that there's a case to be made for the opposite, which is that sometimes we overthink this. right? Particularly the part around the plan, that we just keep planning and planning and planning and planning and planning. And guess what? You're never going to leave Connecticut if you don't
right,
stop
exactly.
planning and start taking some action. To your point, it's going to change 1,000 times, right? I-70 is going to be closed somewhere along the way, or you're just not going to want to drive across Kansas, and
Right. Yeah,
something's going to
can't plan
change.
your way through this.
You can't. You can't. What you can do is plan to take action.
Yeah, whatever your idea is right now, it's just a mechanism to get started.
Yes.
But that doesn't even matter, because my concern, and Ryan, what you and I talk through a lot, is building a business model. And by way of that, building a business that you're going to spend all of your time and
Yes.
effort into, that isn't aligned with what you're actually trying to achieve personally,
Right.
professionally, if you can call it that, is a huge waste of time. You're
is.
totally misaligned with where you're headed. And I got to
Right.
say, for all the founders that I talk to and walk through this with, I'm being generous when I say maybe 10% have answers to any of this, which kills me. And I'll say this with 100% certainty. I didn't give this a lick of thought for every bit of 20 years. So this isn't me like pointing to everybody else and being like, oh my God, you did something wrong. The only reason I know this is true is because I did it wrong much longer than probably most people will ever do it wrong. And I learned my lesson, which is part of the reason we're here. And so, Ryan, first things first, when we talk about all the different aspects of what we're trying to get people to unpack with this North Star, I'm curious, where do you tend to open up with when you're asking folks, how to take a better path?
A lot of times it's kind of a time-based thing. It's like, when you're looking back at this 15 years from now, like what do you want to have happened, right? What is it that should have occurred in order to make this future state true, and it's a future state that you're actually happy in, right? Which is just a different way of asking them, what did you want to achieve? Right. And it typically starts out with them immediately talking about something that the business has accomplished. And I try to redirect that back into, no. What have you achieved in this period? What is different about your life at this point? We'll talk about how the business enabled, empowered, and enforced that change and transformation. But it really starts with something along those lines, right? It's really trying to understand, how do they see this future state and this transformation, so that we can at least start to draw some vectors around directions to head, right? Because if you're still not even sure that you want to head to California, I can't even tell you, go west, right? Like at that point, it's like, I don't know, right? I don't know. You don't know where you want to get to at all. You can't see that future state. It's really hard to take steps in that direction. So it's about kind of unpacking, as cliche as it may sound, like, what are some of the hopes and dreams you have for your life, right? And or for your family. And just to jump back a step to what we were talking about around this over planning and, trying to get it exactly right on the business model, that can also lock you into a path that may be counter to what your life changes to want to be over time. Because certainly the aspirations I had as a 19-year-old were different than I had at a 25-year-old, as a 31-year-old, as now a 42-year-old. The aspirations have changed along the way, and so would the answers, right? And so luckily, because we've been fortunate enough to be entrepreneurs and to be founders and to be able to have agency in these decisions, and not having been fixed into some like business model where it was just set in stone, this is exactly what I'm going to do and it's going to achieve everything I ever wanted. Turns out I didn't know the answers to either of those things at the time, right? So it's about projecting out what you think you want to have happen. And then the age old trick, just keep asking why. Right? I just keep asking why. That's what they want. And you eventually kind of get down to some core things that are really these fundamental principles of what they want to achieve and why, what's driving this individual. And sometimes I agree with them, sometimes I don't, right? But that's not for me to decide. That's what's going to set their path. That's what's going to dictate, what their approach to all this looks like. And I can help in either way. But that's usually where it starts for me. How different is your approach?
Well, here's what I've learned, Ryan, is it takes just as much time to build a business that accomplishes none of your goals as it does for one that aligns perfectly with it. That's the part that's missing. When I started my first company, I had no understanding that I could actually. I didn't even know you could pick your own goals. I was like,
Right.
I'm broke. This will make me unbroke. That's my. That's
There it
the
is.
business. That's all
Goal
there is to
set.
it, right?
Got it. Yep.
And so it didn't even occur to me, like I said, that any of my other wants were even on the table. And so that's part of this discussion, folks that are listening. I'll make it very clear. You can spend just as much time with this big idea and get none of what you're really trying to accomplish accomplished. And folks are going to push back and like, no, that's not true. I want to be independently wealthy. I want to create these professional goals, etc. Of course you do. Who wouldn't? We're not saying you don't want to do that.
Right.
What we're saying is, what if you could do that and accomplish 10 other things that you were actually trying to do if you gave it like 5 seconds of thought, which most people do not. And so, but here's the other side of it. We'll take that off the table for a second. The other side of it is that by setting out exactly what you do and don't want to achieve, it makes finding your idea 1,000 times easier.
Right.
I'll give you an example. When we started startups.com almost 10 years ago, what became startups.com, kind of the genesis of it, was I was in a position where I'd done a bunch of startups and none of them made me happy, right? Good exit, bad exit, whatever. I felt like I was on this hamster wheel where nothing would change, right? No matter how many times I ran, I wound up at the same spot on the hamster wheel. And it drove me insane. And so finally I was like, let me stop the part where I just come up with good ideas or what I think are good ideas or business models or whatever, because I did it 8 times now. And that part clearly didn't get me any further. It sounded cool because I could come up with a business idea nobody had thought of, but it didn't get me anywhere. So what am I missing? So I'm sitting there on the whiteboard and I'm trying to come up with business ideas like I normally do because it's all I know, right? And one day I was like, okay, I'm getting nowhere. What if I try something else? Instead, what is this really trying to achieve? And this is where I went down the rabbit hole. This is where it changed everything. This was the red pill, blue pill moment, right? And I was like, wait a minute.
Which one was it, by the way?
I never remember. I can never remember that scene well enough to remember which pill matters. Anyway, so I end up starting to write down all of these things that had nothing to do with the business idea.
Right.
And I said, what do I want to get out of this? And I said, well, I love talking to people. I'm a super outgoing person and I love chatting with people. I love helping people. And then I was like, well, who do I love helping? And I'll be honest, kind of just founders. I would love to say I love to help so many different people. I'm only good at one thing, and that's helping founders. And when I'm doing it, which is like all the time, I'm so happy.
Yes.
And that's where all this started to come from. Again, if this were a business idea, it would be the dumbest business idea because all I knew at the time is talking to founders makes me happy. How can I get paid to do that for the rest of my life? Or can I? Right?
Can you?
I don't really want to be a consultant, and I don't really want to be like a venture capital guy. And I was like, there's got to be something there. But here's where it got interesting, Ryan. The moment I locked in on what I was actually trying to do without knowing how I was going to get there, everything started to fall into place.
Sure.
Right?
You've now got a guide.
At that point, right, I wasn't saying I just want to go west. I was like, I specifically want to be in California. And now I started to think, okay, what's the best route to get there? But it changed because I stopped thinking about business ideas. Business ideas being like the equivalent of roads on the map, right?
Right.
And I knew exactly what I was trying to get out of it, even if I didn't know how to get there yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What do you think changed? Like what finally led you to that moment? Was it just the realization that you'd done this enough times that just coming up with business models wasn't really going to get you there? I get that moment. And I remember a similar one in my own life. And I want to hear from you. What was it that made it stick that time? Because for me, it wasn't the first time that I'd considered it, right? It wasn't like this was a brand new idea that like, hey, maybe I should think about myself in all of this. But what was it about this time that made it actually stick for you? What made you decide that time? It's like, hey, I'm going to break this apart into 2 pieces. I'm really going to consider myself in this. How did you get to that point where you felt okay? We talk about permission a lot on Startup Therapy, and I think that there was some permission happened there, right? Was this a conversation with somebody else? Was this you giving yourself permission? What allowed you in that moment to say, I'm going to think about me. That's okay.
I kept playing the same movie through, right? I kept saying, okay,
Yeah.
I just did this like 5 times in the last 7 years starting
Right.
other companies, and I feel shittier. Like, even though I was successful, I actually feel shittier. Like, what
Yeah.
happened? And so I felt so it's like such a massive waste of time to go down this path again, knowing full well, I mean, once you've done it 8 times, like, how many more times do you have to, to
Right.
run through this gauntlet to realize that you can't win? It just occurred to me that, like, my objectives were broken, right?
Yeah.
I didn't have
I'm
any. I mean,
picturing I'm
if I'm being
picturing the movie
honest, I didn't have
Groundhog
any.
Day with 9 more days added to it. It does not make it a better movie. It makes it far
I
worse, in fact. If we,
I don't know,
I
and
think.
so, just because I was so frustrated with I didn't know what idea I wanted to pursue at all,
Yeah.
and because I was so frustrated that every time I thought I would just have to find an idea and the rest would take care of itself, it
Yep.
never, ever did.
Yeah.
At some point, I started to say, "Okay, there's gotta be some other angle that I'm missing," and this was specifically it.
Yeah.
Here's the cool thing about this. Once you start to lay out all of the things that you're trying to achieve, it makes picking an idea super easy because guess
It
what?
does.
For the first time, you've got criteria.
Yeah.
For example, like Ryan, when I said, "Hey, I know I want to be talking to founders all day," that's such useful criteria,
Yes.
right? And then I started to say, "Well, okay, let's throw paths at that, right? One path, could I be a consultant? Did that before, hated it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that one's off the table. Could I be a VC? I would suck at it. Take that off the table, right? And so now I had criteria to
Right.
throw against my idea. And here's the important difference. Prior to that, the criteria would be these things like does the business model have a SaaS or revenue model or a recurring
Right.
model, right?
Right.
What's the
Right. Right.
LTV? And I had these business metrics for what a
Yep.
good idea would be. What I missed in that is even if they made it past those metrics, I still would feel like shit when it was all over because
Right.
I didn't have
That's
the
it.
other metrics, the ones that were more important, right? The
The
other
ones that
filters
actually
were actually the
matter.
ones I was looking for.
Yep, because as we've said before, this is just, the business is just a conduit to something else, right? We've,
Great.
we've
Yeah.
talked
Yeah.
about it, right? Like it's just a conduit to something else, right? It's a conduit to providing value to people, providing value to ourselves as the founders, right? Just like money is a conduit, right? Making money doesn't matter unless you have something important you want to spend it on, right? Having more money matters even less unless you have something else you need to spend it on, right? And it's the same thing here. If you get caught up just in the success metrics that only point to the success of the business, is it really a success, right? In these types of businesses where the founders are inextricable from the business itself, right?
Right.
If the founder doesn't feel successful, if they don't feel happy, if they don't feel transformed in the way they wanted to at the end, you have accomplished nothing other than aging, right? Which
Right.
you can do in a lot of easier ways than being a founder, and at a much slower pace as well.
Here's a bunch of filters that people use that actually aren't good filters. For
Yeah.
example, I want to make money. Dude, you just described every business ever, right? That is
Yeah.
not a filter. Right?
Right.
Like, if
It's
you go
also called a job, right? Like
yeah,
that's
what
the
I'm saying. If you
fastest
go
way to
any
make money. Go
direction,
get a
you're going to
job.
make money.
Yep.
Useless filter, right? I want to work for myself. You just described all of entrepreneurship. You did that is not
Yep.
a filter, right?
Right.
That's the point. Like, I want something that has recurring revenue. There's a million businesses that have recurring revenue, right?
Yep.
You're not getting anywhere.
The
These
compass
are
needle
not
is still
good
just
filters.
spinning 360 degrees. There is no North Star in any of that, right? It can't make you say, because all you have to do is simply apply a couple of simple questions to any of those, and you'll realize it doesn't get you to a binary yes or a no, right? To me, that's what a true North Star does, is anytime I compare the thought, the idea, the product, even just the path towards the product, the hire, whatever it is, when I compare that to the North Star, it should be as binary as possible, and it should be an easy filter. It should help me say yes or no with very, very few questions asked, right? It keeps us pointed in that right direction. So the time spent, the time invested in defining that will save you so much bloody time down the road, because you won't be belaboring the questions by asking and using the wrong metrics. Like you just said, you're asking the wrong
Right.
questions, you're applying the wrong frameworks to these things, and you won't even know that, right? And you'll spend a lot of time going through analysis that turns out doesn't fucking matter, right? That feels
Right.
good to know that I just spent a whole bunch of time, figuring something out that didn't need figuring, right? No thanks.
Well, also the more specific your goals are, right? the easier it is to map things to them. For example,
sure.
people say, well, I want to have a huge exit. By the way, this is we joke about this all the time.
Yep.
You do not need a huge exit to change your life dramatically,
You don't.
right? And so when people say I need a huge exit, we always push back and we say, well, specifically, what do you need it, to achieve? Well, I want to buy a nice house. I want to have savings. I want to have FU money. I want to whatever. That
Right.
is geometrically less money than you think it is.
Then you think it is. Yep.
In which case, like if you had a $3 million business throwing off $1 million a year, you would be hard pressed to find things that you cannot buy, right? It buys
Right.
you almost everything, right?
Yep.
In this life.
Yep.
Are there like, private jets and islands that don't come with that? Sure. Guess what?
Yeah.
You can work a little bit harder, I guess, once you get to that milestone to go get those
Right.
as well. Not knocking it, right?
Right.
But if you were to say, well, damn, dude, all I really need is a $3 million business throwing off $1 million a year. Do you know if there's like landscaping companies that do that? Right?
Oh,
Like,
lots
you know
of
how many
service-based businesses
businesses-
doing this. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
For that matter, you don't even have to be novel, right?
Right.
You could start buying up franchises and do that.
Yep.
I mean, like if that's what you're actually trying to achieve and you're smart enough to know this is the specific goal I'm trying to get to, down to the penny, if your goals are just financial, you're overthinking the big idea.
Right.
I
don't
would
need a
argue
big idea.
for most founders, you don't need a big idea. You
Nope.
need an idea. And
You need an idea and
just
some
need to work on
execution.
it for the rest of your life, and you'll
Yep.
get what you want. But again, we overcomplicate this stuff because we don't tie it to goals. And if we don't have goals, we say dumb shit like I need to have an IPO, right?
Right.
Why? Right?
Yeah.
And again,
How is that
if
going to help
do,
you? Yeah.
If those are your needs, if you need a $40 million house in Bel Air and you need a fleet of jets, and yeah, you actually do need an IPO.
You
like
need
that
an
is-
IPO.
I'm going to guess 99.99% of people listening to this podcast don't need that outcome.
Correct.
By the way, I know a bunch of people who have done it. They didn't need it either.
They didn't.
Those
Now
are the
they've got it.
people
Now
that
they're
did
like,
it.
you know what? Didn't need it. Not any happier.
Right, right.
And in fact, we have cases of people that we know personally who've done this and are less happy post.
Of course. Yeah,
right?
yeah. And we've done whole episodes just on that
Yes.
alone. But what we're saying is do not go into this without the North Star.
Right.
If you haven't defined the North Star,
Yep.
you are wasting your time. Take it
Yes.
from me. Ryan, you've gone through the same thing. We've worked
Yep.
with founders doing the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. We see it all the time.
By the way, I just want to mention if what we're talking about today sounds like the kind of discussion you wish you were having more often, you actually can. We're online all day, every day, working through exactly these types of topics with founders just like you. So any question you would have, or maybe some problem you just want to work through, we're here and we love this stuff. And we're easy to find. Head over to groups.startups.com and let's just start talking. Let's flip it, Ryan, because this is another part that I really enjoy. A lot of founders sometimes don't know exactly what they want to achieve. It's kind of hard to sometimes pin these things down.
Yep.
But everyone knows what they want to avoid,
Sure.
right? So
That's
let's
another
talk
great
about that.
point on the
'cause
star.
It's
Yeah.
actually kind of
Yep.
more important.
Yep.
What did we want to avoid, Ryan? Like, what are some of the big things that you can recall us talking about in the early days?
Oh man, we talked about not wanting to be beholden to anybody, so capital raising and things like that was off the table. We didn't want to work with jerks, and we still don't, and we still refuse to. We didn't
Not
want to
easy
have
to do, by the
bosses.
way.
It's not. It's not.
Yeah.
It turns out there's no shortage in supply,
And sometimes they're us.
Yeah, sometimes they are. Sometimes they are. But it was things like that. They were pretty obvious, right? And again, like they were good in terms of helping to define the North Star because they were specific, right? Because they gave us clear guidance on things like the no jerks rule, right? Like, should we hire this person? Their performance is fantastic. Like, look at what all they accomplished. They walk in for the first interview and they're a jerk right off the bat, and it's like, this doesn't usually go the other way. People don't walk in and like, let me test what will happen if I act like a jerk on the first day, and then I'll go back to my sugar sweet self for the rest of my career with this company. And so we're like, you know what? Kind of doesn't matter. Yeah, you'd probably really be great at this role, and we'd probably really regret having you here every day afterwards. And so those kind of things make it really, really easy, right? The thing about not wanting to be beholden to anybody else. Pretty simple, right? The minute you take on capital, we've said it before, you're hiring your boss. The investors are now your boss.
Right.
We didn't want that. We wanted
Right.
to avoid that, and we have, and we don't regret that at all. So those are the kind of the big ones. There are tons of other little things that we said we didn't want to have to do. We didn't want to have to work from an office every day of the week,
Yep.
right? So we stopped doing that.
Long time ago,
And
before it was
a
fashion.
long time, yeah, right. Well, yeah, this is we were wearing bell bottoms in the '80s, like between the two periods where they were cool.
Well, Ryan, what I love about the what do you want to avoid is it actually starts to create a very concrete North Star, right?
Yes.
Because, for example, I hated working with clients, right? And just,
Yep.
I love customers, I hate clients, right? The difference being customers are somebody that pays us $100, and if they hate us, love us, whatever, they can go and our business kind of goes on the same. Clients are the people who know if they leave and take their business with them, you're
Yeah.
screwed, right? So
Right.
you pretty much work for them. At the agency, my first agency, we had a client that will not be named, that held basically half of our payroll, right? Uh, Hundreds of millions of dollars. And they knew very well, it's kind of why they hired us, if I'm being honest, that
Yep.
if they pulled, right, that our whole agency would implode overnight. And they
Yep.
used that to great effect every single day for
Sure.
years upon years upon years.
It's a
We were
hell of a
their
lot of leverage.
marionette, right?
Yep.
And got to tell you, hated every minute of it. And that was a very concrete North Star. Not going to
Yeah.
do that again, right? worked with actually some great investors. And so I'm not going to sit here and say that I had a terrible experience with investors, because I really didn't. Even when things didn't work out, I got to say, it's a pretty solid investors. However, despite that, and this isn't their fault, by the way, this one's on me, but it was definitely part of the North Star. Never wanted to work with investors again. Not
Yep.
because anything that they did wrong, but because I didn't like waking up in the morning or going to bed at night saying, I wonder what they think my business should do. Or
Yes.
even better, when they would call me and say as much, here's what your business
Right.
should do. Here's what you should be doing right now. And I was like, I never got that call or had that conversation, hung up the phone, be like, man, I feel great.
Yeah.
I'm so glad they
that
called
happened.
and told me
Right.
what to do. Right?
Right.
Never made me feel good. And Ryan, one of the mechanisms I use when I think through this is I always picture being at dinner with my wife and telling her about my day. And I think about when I was talking about stuff that frustrated me, what was it?
What
Right?
were those things?
And if it was
Yep.
thematic, if I kept bringing up the same thing thematically all the time, I said, what if I could live a life where I don't have to talk about that at dinner
Right.
because I took it out of
Yep.
my plan, right?
Yeah.
And so clients, right, where I would have
Right.
said, oh my God, our big client, you drug us through the mud again. I have to be in all these meetings. This is killing me, et cetera. And I'm like, if I just say I'll never work with clients again, I'll never have that
Don't have
conversation
to
again.
do that anymore. Yep.
And here's the unlock. I'll kind of leave it at this. The unlock is the way to be happier is stop doing shit that doesn't make you happy.
Yeah.
It sounds so obvious. Took me
Complicated.
20
Could you
years to
walk me
figure
through
it
that
out.
one more time, Will?
Yeah.
That one's tough.
You'd never think it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Spend time doing the things that you do enjoy, and the things that you know make you unhappy. Just stop doing them. Right. Like this is, and I think that it's interesting, but these are really like the two rails that point us right at that North Star, right? What do I want to achieve on one side? What do I want to avoid on the other? And then you just follow that off into the distance, and that becomes that vanishing point, that perspective point. And it becomes really clear what falls inside and what falls outside those lines. And anything that falls outside them just needs to be excluded kind of summarily, right? You shouldn't have flexibility on this. And this is what we start to see happen. I've certainly seen people start off with this intent in mind, with a good North Star, and then things come along opportunistically, and they decide to jump on those because it meant more cash or being able to hire some more people, or whatever it was that in the moment felt good, but fell outside those guidelines and led to at least short-term pain, if not long-term tragedy for the business. And that's why once you've defined these things, it's not that things can't change, but there are fundamentals that really where we see, and like the example I used earlier about hiring, right? Like hiring a jerk, like, we just really need to push some sales volume. Let's just bite the bullet. Let's take this person on,
Yeah.
even though we know
Do
they're
it
not
all
a good
do it all
cultural
the time.
fit. Let's get the performance right, and then we'll fix it later. And it never happens. And then the sales organization grows out of control, culture goes bad, and you continuously pay for it, right? That becomes the thing you're talking about at dinner, which you had promised yourself years before you would not do, right? And so once you
Right.
do set these things in stone, try to keep them there, right? Try not to bend, try not to let your values have enough flexibility that it hurts you.
Well, so I think that the last one that really, really stood out to me, and it didn't occur to me, Ryan, until I think really after we started startups.com,
Yeah.
is how do I want to feel?
Yep.
Right. And not to be too new agey here, right? Maybe it is, but it turned out it was actually kind of the most important one. Didn't realize it at the
Yeah.
time, but I think because we aligned on the other two, that this one
Right.
started to really become obvious to us. I'll give you an example. You and I get an opportunity to help founders all day long, and like I said earlier, I love helping people. I actually
Right.
really, really enjoy it, and I can't tell. I can't tell if it's selfish, like, hey, if I'm helping you, but it makes me feel good, like, am I really just doing it because it makes me feel good? And does that make me a bad person? Be honest, I don't care. Either way, I'm helping you, and it makes me feel good. So
And it
as
makes you
far as
feel
I'm
good, right?
concerned,
It's a
wins all around.
win-win.
Yeah,
Yep.
right. And so I started to kind of dig into this more and more. And I started to think about how do these things make me feel? For
Yeah.
example, right? When I'm helping people, it makes me feel good, right? When I have a lot of people that I have to administrate and deal with minutia and bullshit, right? Doesn't make me feel good, right?
Yep.
As it happens, I don't even know the count. I have a handful of direct reports, right? And everybody else handles everything else because I really suck at it and it doesn't make me feel good,
Doesn't
right?
make
And
you
those two
happy.
things go
Yep.
hand in hand.
Yep.
And so there's no reason where we can't start to say, when I come home at the end of the day or when I look back on my career, how do I want to feel? Do I want to feel like I helped
Yep.
people? Do I want to feel like, I didn't get wound up in a bunch of stuff I hated? And what if I could be in a job, or more specifically, create a job, because we're not just in a job. If I could create a job that made me feel awesome every day, what would it look like? Why did I
Yeah.
just focus on that? And
Right.
maybe it doesn't matter if I have the Uber for whatever, right? Maybe it depends. If I can find something where everything checks the boxes or gets close enough to it, isn't like kind of that the idea? You know what I mean?
You would hope so, right? But again, I think it's funny. I'd like to get your take on this, but this feels like more of a recent problem. This feels like a problem post romanticizing the startup versus the entrepreneur, right? Where all of a sudden we saw these astronomical outcomes, and that became the bar, right? That became rather than the high watermark, right? That all
Right.
of a sudden it was like I've got to beat Zuck or like I suck, right? Like I'm no good at this, right? We've either got to go big or go home. We've got to IPO or it doesn't count. And again, it just goes back to like you're using the wrong yardstick to measure this thing. But it feels like more of a recent problem to me because I remember at the time, I was starting my first business roughly around the same time you were starting yours. These weren't discussions, right? There wasn't any kind of third party expectation that I was trying to live up to. Like I had like the New York Stock Exchange. Like that was the only other companies that had any objective measures on, right? Nobody was talking about
Sure.
fundraising at that point, like not where I was in the world, not the people that I
Sure.
was surrounding myself with. And so this feels like more of a modern challenge, that we get these metrics wrong and that we start to measure ourselves in ways that are not only not productive for the founder, for the business, but can actually be quite harmful, because they lead us to making decisions that are counter to our own desired outcomes, or what would be our desired outcomes if we had spent enough time to actually think about what those things were.
Well, if we knew what we wanted the desired outcomes to be, like again, how we wanted to feel or what we wanted to avoid or what we specifically would love to do all day, then we could start to actually like the idea would start to find itself. I know that sounds silly, but that's actually how it happened. So for example, one of my things is I was trying to ideate on this a bit was um I want to do whatever I do next. I want it to be whatever I would otherwise do on a Saturday, right?
Yes.
The idea being that like I'd be doing this even in my free time, even if
Right.
it wasn't paying, right? Now that sounds awesome, right? And I would argue that probably doesn't apply to most people. So I'm not going to be one of those silly people that says, "Oh, you should, do what makes you happy, and everything will follow." Okay, maybe.
Right.
But for this one, this is actually what helped me. This is actually what got me to where I needed to be. And I was like, well, what would I want to do on Saturday? I was like, well, I love to go to dinner with people. I'm a super outgoing person. It turns out most of the people I would always find myself going to dinner with that were interesting were founders.
Founders.
Because
Yep.
founders always have so much shit going on and they have big ideas and they're fun to talk to. And they're very committed. And I was like, well, that's cool. Like, okay, so I guess my idea is going to dinner with founders, right? Not as silly as it is, right? But I started to build on that more. And that's actually where a founder group product came from, right?
Yep.
I was like just doing that naturally. Actually, were dinners. I was having all these dinners with founders. And I was like, well, damn, how do I get paid for this? And
Right.
I'll give them credit.
Took you 20 years to turn it into a product, but you got there.
Yeah. Mark Nagar, the CEO of Startup Weekend, ex-CEO of Startup Weekend, worked with me for like a year and a half to kind of develop this, to figure out, what this is going to be. And that in this case, it became Founder Groups, one of the products that we built. But it was simply like, hey, this is actually what I want to be doing all day. So how do I get paid for it? Or how do I let what I'm trying to get accomplished guide me to where I want to go?
Yeah.
Right. And what was awesome about that is it for the first time in my life with startups.com, with founder groups, or anything else that we've done, it didn't feel tortured. It didn't feel like I was trying too hard.
No.
Right?
Felt very natural. Like this is what we were supposed to be doing.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, I don't know exactly what the business is going to be yet.
Yeah.
But I know exactly what it needs to achieve. And I know exactly, all the metrics around it. So let me start something, right? For us, if you recall, that was Fundable for us, fundable.com, our fundraising platform.
Yep.
And it was like, okay, that's not exactly, what we think it is, but it'll start the wheels turning.
Yeah.
And I think
got
a
us
lot
moving,
of people,
right?
Right,
We helped
right.
founders. It started with that, right? It started with the idea that we wanted to be able to
we started
talk
to check some of the
founders,
boxes.
help them with things that they truly didn't understand that we did, right?
Right.
And that got us moving. That got us moving west, right?
Yep.
And that was enough.
It was. And so what I would say is for folks that are trying to bang their head against the wall with the next new big idea, right? Looking for the big idea is a massive waste of time, right? Especially if your big idea takes you a direction you're not even trying to go, actually makes your life way more miserable, as it did for me for like 20 years. Right?
Yeah.
What I would say is the focus should be, what am I trying to achieve? What is this mechanism going to try to achieve for me? And once we start to really identify that and really lock that down, we'll find that some of the paths we were considering were actually the wrong paths. They weren't going to achieve any of those things. And that we did ourselves a huge favor by avoiding spending 5 or 10, or in my case, 20 years of our life pursuing paths that went nowhere. So when we're starting out, when we're first looking at how to build this next great company, let's start with what we're trying to achieve. Let's point that toward our North Star and let the rest of everything follow along behind it. All right, so that was fun, but let's actually keep this conversation going. You've heard what we think about this, but Ryan and I would really like to hear what you think. And we're online like all day long, pretty much talking about every startup topic you could think of, from fundraising to customer acquisition to just really how to get all of this crazy startup stuff out of your head. And there's tons of other founders just like you. They're weighing in on these topics, so you'll get a chance to just hang out and meet some really smart founders. We're also super, super easy to find. You head over to groups.startups.com and let Ryan and I hear what's on your mind. Let's get to know each other a little bit, and let's just start having more of these conversations.